Continued from the previous file, questions and answers of Look Back in Anger. Helena explains, page 24, her action in staying behind by saying that she has an appointment in Birmingham on the following day about a job. When Alison is gone, Jimmy is not there and Jimmy is unaware of the fact that Alison is pregnant. When Jimmy returns, he speaks to Helena in his usual offensive way. Helena slaps him but then kisses him passionately. Helena's action gives rise to the suspicion that Helena has fallen in love with Jimmy at the very beginning and she has planned Alison's departure from the house in order to make love to Jimmy. In Alison's absence, Jimmy and Helena live together and Helena is found to have adjusted herself to Jimmy's habitual manner of talking. This sentimental and loving relationship is dramatically important because it shows that the relationship is based on sexual attraction. At the end of Act 3, Scene 1, we find Jimmy and Helena in a jolly mood and the act closes with both fondling and caressing each other. But towards the end of the next scene, Helena announces her decision to leave Jimmy. Alison's return brings about an abrupt and revolutionary change in Helena's attitude. In spite of Alison's assurance that she does not want to disrupt the relationship between Helena and Jimmy, Helena declares that her having lived with Jimmy as his mistress was all wrong. Quote, "It is all over between Jimmy and me. I can see it now." Unquote. Helena's conscience has now awakened and she cannot continue to live with Jimmy for satisfying her physical and emotional desires. She has also discovered what is wrong with Jimmy. There is no place for people like that any longer, in sex or politics or anything. That is why he is so futile. As a matter of fact, Helena serves the dramatic purpose of contrast to Alison, who is busy and listless. But Helena has a strong willpower and she can possess what she wants. She accepts the challenge that Jimmy embodies. Helena has the self-destruction which Jimmy seeks. There is no tenderness in their relationship. Their passion is only an aspect of their enmity. Helena is locked out of the process of self-destruction, which is the only route open to Jimmy. Helena is a realist who survives by deliberately restricting the range of emotions that she would allow to affect her. Helena performs an important function because she combines the two attitudes, the educated loyalty to truth and sentimental longing for a lost world of ideas. She is a modern intellectual but not dispossessed of her identity. Jimmy's attack of her sentimental Christianity is very self-revealing. Jimmy is as much of a sentimental snob as Helena is, even his snobbery is inverted. Page 25. Question number 12. Write a note on the character of Cliff. Answer. Cliff is a character who has a significant role in the action of the drama. His obvious role is to act as a buffer between Jimmy and Alison. He is, however, greatly attached to both Jimmy and Alison. He does not like the way Jimmy is always persecuting and harassing Alison. At the very beginning, when Jimmy questions Alison in a very troublesome manner, Cliff says to him, quote, "Leave the poor girl alone, she is busy." Unquote. A moment later, he again says to Jimmy, quote, "Leave her alone, I said." Unquote. As a matter of fact, Cliff makes a constant effort to establish peace between Jimmy and Alison. It is noteworthy that he is very informal in his relation with Alison. He can fondle her, embrace her, and even kiss her without in any way embarrassing her or exciting any suspicion in Jimmy's mind. Jimmy does on one occasion suggest to Cliff that he should go to bed with Ellison, but this is only a joke. Neither Cliff nor Ellison has any sexual motive in their attachment to each other. When questioned by Helena, Ellison tells her that she and Cliff are fond of each other. There is, however, an intimacy between the two. It is to Cliff that Ellison reveals her pregnancy first, thus showing her great confidence in him. Again, it is to Cliff that she expresses a feeling of disgust and intolerance with the ill treatment of Jimmy. When Ellison has burnt her arm, it is Cliff who promptly attends to her by trying to soothe her by applying soap to the burnt part. Between Cliff and Jimmy, there is also a close bond. With Jimmy too, Cliff is entirely informal. Whenever Jimmy bothers him too much, he does not hesitate to retaliate. When, for instance, Jimmy says to him, quote, "You are too ignorant," unquote, Cliff replies, quote, "Yes, and uneducated. Now shut up, will you?" unquote. Then he calls Jimmy, quote, "a bloody pig," unquote, quote, "a food maniac," unquote. Most of Cliff's retorts to Jimmy show Cliff's sense of humor and his capacity for being blunt and frank. He hates Jimmy's spying, Jimmy's playing on trumpet. Cliff describes to Ellison his friendship with Jimmy. Quote, "Well, I suppose he and I think the same about a lot of things because we are alike in some ways. We both come from working people, if you like. And anyway, he gets on with me because I am common as dirt, that is me," unquote. This speech shows Cliff's modesty and humanity. Cliff is not as intellectual as Jimmy is. On one occasion, when Cliff is reading a newspaper, he modestly says that he is trying, quote, "to better," unquote, himself. When he decides to leave Jimmy, he frankly admits that Jimmy is a highly educated man. Thus, he admits he is intellectually inferior to, page 26, Jimmy. His reason for leaving Jimmy is that he would like to try his hand on something other than a sweet stall. As a matter of fact, Cliff is a contrast to Jimmy. If Jimmy is Hamlet, Cliff is Horatio. He is a good friend and always tries to rectify the aberrations of Jimmy. He may not be intellectual like Jimmy, but he has a sense of proportion and a sense of solidarity, which is a working class virtue and which Jimmy misses in both Ellison and Helena. Cliff's principal role in the play is to act as a sounding board and as a restraint on the excesses of Jimmy's outbursts. The antagonism between Jimmy and Ellison is mitigated by the presence of Cliff. His role culminates when the mock struggle between Jimmy and Ellison causes an accident in which Ellison's hand is burnt. However, when Helena scolds Cliff for not doing something about Jimmy's insulting remarks to Ellison, Cliff says that he is not a police officer. He bluntly tells Helena that the situation in the Potter's household has worsened since Helena's arrival there. He describes his role in the house. This has always been a battlefield, but I am pretty certain that if I had not been here, everything would have been over between these two, Jimmy and Ellison, long ago. I have been a no man's land between them, unquote. Cliff is a sincere well-wisher to both, a real friend to them, a very warm and affectionate person. He is therefore greatly affected when Ellison decides to leave Jimmy. He would like Ellison to wait till Jimmy comes back from London. He tells Ellison that the house will lose much of its charm when she is gone. When Ellison urges to look after Jimmy when she is no longer there, Cliff replies, quote, "We will keep the old outhouse going somehow," unquote. After Ellison has left, Cliff shows his irritation when Helena asks him what Jimmy will do now. He says in disgust, quote, "Why the hell should I know?" unquote. He then gets ready to go out of the house. His words to Helena before he leaves her, quote, "You give it to him. He is all yours. And I hope he rams it up your nostrils," unquote. Cliff is loyal and faithful, frank and candid, simple and amiable. His decision to live in Act 3, Scene 1 shows that he has been changed in course of the play. His living is a form of retreat, and we feel that as a result of his exposure to Jimmy and others, he has been made more conscious. In Act 3, Scene 1, a struggle ensues between Jimmy and Cliff, which parallels the struggle in Act 1. He announces his desire to leave because of his sense of purposelessness in the house. Cliff's departure enhances the intellectual desolation of Jimmy. He acts as a restraint, and his departure makes it possible for further recklessness of Jimmy. Jimmy's relationship with Helena is, page 27, to a great extent the result of departure of Cliff and Ellison. Jimmy's mental and spiritual conflict requires some object or person. He lacks that control which Cliff possesses. However, Cliff is also conscious of deep insecurity about himself. He much depends on the relationship with Jimmy and Ellison. Cliff is therefore an important character in the play because it is through his conscious reactions much of the action follows. Question 13. Write a note on the character of Colonel Redfern. Answer. Colonel Redfern is a less complex character in the play. Yet he is also integrated into the main choice which Jimmy's monologues pose. Quote, "The choice of how to survive in a world whose values are in turmoil." Unquote. Redfern is Ellison's father and was the commander of a Maharaja's army in an Indian state. He had been very happy as an army officer, and since his departure from India, he has been remembering the past with a sense of nostalgia. He tells Ellison in Act 2, Scene 2 about his life in the army and about his love in army life. The long, cool evening up in the hills, everything purple and golden, were delightful to him. Thus he is nostalgic of the past. However, Osborne describes the colonel in an ironical manner in the stage directions. Quote, "Brought up to command respect, he is often slightly withdrawn and uneasy. Now that he finds himself in a world where his authority has lately become less and less unquestionable." Unquote. As he seems to be living most of the time in the past, Jimmy is right in making a mocking reference to the colonel's life in India when the world looked, quote, "pretty tempting," unquote, to the colonel. Jimmy describes the colonel as, quote, "just one of those sturdy old plants left over from the Edwardian wilderness that can't understand when the sun is not shining anymore," unquote. Jimmy is sarcastic, but there is truth in this description. Redfern and his wife were opposed to Ellison's marriage with Jimmy. He feels sorry about Ellison's condition. He admits that he has not approved of Jimmy as his son-in-law, but he does not like to interfere in the matter between husband and wife. He admits that Jimmy has a certain amount of right on his side. Both he and his wife are responsible for their unequal marriage. Thus, Redfern is a man of common sense and practical wisdom. He has really judged the nature of his daughter when he says to her that she likes to, quote, "sit on the fence because it is comfortable and more peaceful," unquote. When in the course of the conversation, Ellison expresses the view that Jimmy married her with a revengeful motive, the Colonel cannot understand, page 28, such a motive. He says, quote, I always believed that people married each other because they were in love. That always seemed a good enough reason to me. But apparently that is too simple for young people nowadays. They have to talk about challenge and revenge. I just can't believe that love between man and woman is really like that. Unquote. He also shows his common sense by reminding Ellison that her decision to leave Jimmy is a momentous one. Quote, this is a big step you are taking. You have made up your mind to come back with me. Is that really what you want? Unquote. When Ellison insists that she must go with him, he, like a good father, says no more about it. Thus, the character of Redfern has an important function in the play. Redfern represents the past values. He is nostalgic about his army life. He is an affectionate father and a devoted husband. Thus, Redfern serves to emphasize that Jimmy has lost direction. Jimmy is attuned to the spirit of Redfern because he, like Redfern, is attached to the past. Like Redfern, Jimmy survives by idealizing the past, by creating defensive pockets of memory to which he can retire when the emptiness of his present and the desolation of his future become too much to bear. Like Colonel Redfern hovering on the brink of nostalgia, Jimmy is repeating the old stories of his idealized past. Redfern's regret for the lost values subtly draws attention to the element of nostalgia in Jimmy's cry that, quote, there are no good brave causes left, unquote. However, Redfern is a rounded character because of his love of his daughter and devotion to his wife, his common sense and his judgment of the character of Jimmy. He admits the incompatibility of the marriage. His devotion to his wife serves as a contrast to Jimmy's frustration in married life. He comes to Ellison's house after receiving the telegram, but he wants to go back quickly in order to spare his wife's anxiety. Quote, your mother will be worried, I know, unquote. On the whole, the Colonel is a pathetic figure with something comic about him. His nostalgia about his life in India is both comical and pathetic. His devotion to his family and his concern for their welfare are redeeming features, although he cannot adjust himself to the changed circumstances. He represents the old world idea about life, love and fidelity. He is indeed a realized character and has a definite role to play in the drama. Although the play centers on the angry speeches of Jimmy, the questions they pose on the characters serve to create a rich pattern of reactions which deepen the effect on the audience. It is wrong to say that the play is a one-man show. Other characters are important. Page 29. In their own rights and are also important to bring about and heighten the problems of Jimmy's alienation and a sense of emptiness because of false relationships and false values of modern society. Question 14. Is the play Look Back in Anger a one-man show? Discuss other characters to show that they are properly realized. Answer. Discuss the character of Ellison, Helena, Cliff and Redfern. See answer to question number 6 in bracket and questions 11, 12, 13, bracket closed. Question 15. Discuss Helena's relationship with Jimmy. Helena slaps Jimmy and then falls for him. How will you explain this paradoxical attitude of Helena? Answer. When Allison announces that Helena is coming, Jimmy comments, quote, "that bitch," unquote, quote, "one of his natural enemies," unquote. On learning that Helena is coming to stay with Allison, he asks his wife if Helena is bringing her armor because she will need it against his assaults on her. Jimmy does not like Helena's prolonged stay at the Porter's flat. Jimmy is hostile to her from the beginning. Helena dislikes the offensive remarks of Jimmy. She does not like Jimmy's playing on the trumpet. Quote, "It is almost as if he wanted to kill someone with it." When Jimmy denounces Allison's mother, Helena intervenes saying, quote, "Oh, for heaven's sake, don't be such a bully," unquote. When Allison is leaving the flat with her father, Helena stays back, although it was understood that she too would go with Allison. It is Helena who persuaded Allison to leave and send a telegram to her father to take her away. So it may be supposed that she has a motive in making Allison leave the house and herself stay back. She explains that she has an appointment in Birmingham on the following day. Jimmy returns from his visit to London and speaks to Helena in his offensive way. Helena slaps him, but the next moment she kisses him passionately and draws him down on her. Helena's action gives rise to the suspicion that she has fallen in love with Jimmy in the very beginning, and that her having urged Allison to go to her parents' home was part of her plan to get Jimmy as a lover. But there is no textual support for this supposition. However, Helena lives with Jimmy as his mistress for several months. Helena and Jimmy have an exchange of loving and sentimental remarks. In the bracket, the end of Act 3, Scene 1, bracket close, she says, quote, "I love, oh my darling, I have always wanted you," unquote. But on Allison's return, there is an abrupt change in Helena's attitude. In spite of Allison's assurance that she does not want to disrupt their relationship, Helena says, quote, "I know it was utterly wrong," unquote. Her conscience is awakened, and page 30, she can no longer live with Jimmy as his mistress. Her orthodox religion asserts itself. Earlier we see Helena going to church and shows interest in church bells. Allison goes to church with her in defiance of Jimmy's ungodly ways. Helena is more conservative and feels surprised at Allison's relationship with Cliff. It is difficult to explain Helena's strange, uncharacteristic and paradoxical behavior with Jimmy. Dyson observes, quote, "She takes Jimmy for herself because she finds she desires him and wants to have him for a time. At no stage does she allow her values to be questioned by Jimmy," unquote. In bracket, casebook edited by John Russell Taylor, bracket closed. She continues to respond angrily when Jimmy ruffles her with his caustic remarks. It may be argued that Helena has a fascination for the man who hates her. In psychoanalytical terms, she may be called a sadomasochist. She talks of the hatred in Jimmy's eyes. Quote, "It is slightly horrifying and oddly exciting," unquote. It may be that Helena is jealous of Allison because of the latter's domestic life. Helena is a single person. She wants to break the marital life of Allison, and so she poses as Allison's well-wisher and persuades her to leave Jimmy. She is an actress and can conceal her real intentions. Allison is surprised when Helena declares her wish to stay back. Allison asks her, quote, "You loved him, didn't you? That is what you wrote and told me." Unquote. Helena replies, quote, "And it was true." Unquote. She adds at the same time, quote, "I could hardly believe it myself." Unquote. There is a suggestion that she has subconscious urges. It is pointed out that there is no consistency in Helena's character, especially in her behavior towards Jimmy. Quote, "Helena is a series of poses, a personified self-contradiction." Unquote. Helena takes up the challenge that Jimmy embodies. She embodies the self-destruction that Jimmy seeks. Their passion is only an aspect of their enmity, a mutually inescapable challenge. They openly acknowledge this. Quote, "You made a good enemy, didn't you? What they call a worthy opponent." Unquote. When Allison returns, broken and defeated, Helena faces the image of what should have to become to survive unburned. She says to Allison, quote, "What I saw you standing there tonight, I knew that it was utterly wrong." Unquote. Helena is a realist and so retreats to her world of orthodox values. It is an escape from the world of pain and suffering which Jimmy offers. But she retreats to an assurance which is false, leaning on the institutions and patterns which are outdated and inadequate. Raymond Williams says that shifting from one girl to the other, from Allison to Helena and back to Allison, illustrates the rage against a frustrating society. Quote, "The woman is seen as the society which traps and swallows a particular self." Unquote. Continued in the next file.